I don't know why this does this every week. I put that thing on and it goes away in 3 seconds.
Bro, we got a loop. There's a loop button, man. All right. Well, I guess we're starting. Good.
Yeah.
Happy
Hey, everybody. Well, welcome to our second episode as the Populist Block. Got good things going on. We got some cool topics coming up. We're actually in next week. We've got another interview it's going to be with Lantern Phi, and I'm working on something with Stack Mobile, so I'm gonna have some promo codes for people. I'm kind of excited about that to get some new sponsors and some activity on this. But let's right out of the gate talk about Cake Wallet. Probably I feel like it's the leading wallet in the crypto space, right? I don't know anybody talks about
It's definitely my main wallet. And for no other reason, if for no other reason than the fact that it's got MWeb built into it already, which is pretty dope.
Right.
And it's such a great execution. Honestly, the UI, even just like the colors, I think the different color schemes are pretty dope. And we showed off last week with that BTC Pay server demo, which we had a bit of an issue, but that got sorted out. But yeah, we used Cake Wallet to test out BTC Pay servers MWeb functionality, and it worked fantastically. It's pretty quick, almost like near instant, actually.
Well, I think so. Today we're going to talk about something I think is very relevant to crypto. It's IP law, and if you don't know, and I'll bring it up later, there was kind of a recent tweet by Jack from Twitter who talked about getting rid of IP law, and it really kind of, I don't know, it's a very interesting topic because, like with crypto, sometimes like, well, what do you own and what don't you own? That's probably something that we've talked about over the years. Just, I don't want to say debating it, but like, what does it mean to own something, right? How do you own something if it's not defended by some sort of government entity? Certainly, you can't own something physical without somebody else physical in the real world supporting the idea that you own that thing. And so we got coming up is Brian Fry, like literally in a few minutes here, who is a lawyer, like way smarter guy than us, and really knows his ins and outs of IP law. So I'm kind of excited about that. And he's gonna come on here like maybe 10 minutes, not even, and then we're gonna talk about. I think I'll talk about it. We'll talk a bit about autism and RFK, and I'm actually working on trying to get somebody in that is treating people with autism and get a full understanding of it. It's a very sensitive topic. I'm hesitant sometimes to talk about it because I don't know. Sometimes those hot button issues, you feel like you say the wrong thing and you're gonna just trigger. You're not even intending to say something wrong, and you do something wrong, or it comes out in a way that can be misconstrued, which is exactly what happened with RFK. And that's what's kind of baffled me about it and why I want to talk about it. So maybe it's more about how the message is spread than it is about the topic itself that is interesting about what kind of developed this week.
I mean, it's definitely an issue that has to be treated with like the utmost of sensitivity. But I think it's also to acknowledge that there may be a problem that we're not looking at.
Yeah.
And we may be causing ourselves more harm than necessary. And if that is the case, it should be addressed, although very delicately and certainly to with the utmost sensitivity, especially towards those who might be suffering or know someone who's suffering from autism.
Right. So we'll see. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit and then get into it later. But yeah, I get. You know what? Like I said, this week I don't have a ton of stuff to ramble about in the beginning. We did do a Wednesday space this week, and my plan moving forward is to do a Wednesday night spaces unrecorded. I've decided unrecorded is more entertaining, and although last week I actually deleted it because people said things that I don't. I felt like it wasn't a good recorded space. We got into some weird areas, but it was actually interesting. I thought I always find them interesting, or else I wouldn't do them.
For sure.
We talked a bit about like the dating world. Yeah, and
I mean, honestly, you might have a career in dating advice.
Did you like it?
We did help a young man sort out
Well, yeah, what struck me about him, and I guess it's hard to have a leap of faith, and it's maybe easy to say, hey, just be yourself. But truly that is what people are attracted to, is someone who's not trying to put on a front. I mean, there are people who they like the people who put on fronts, they attract each other. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're really worried about your image, you want to be with somebody else who's very worried about their image too. You don't want to carry some slob around with you. So I don't know, man. You get in where you fit in, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Dating advice.
So should we start with Brian?
Yeah, let's bring in Brian. Let me set up the thing here. We're gonna get rid of. Hang on. I get rid of this. Bring in Brian. Brian L. Fry. You include the L. That must be important for some reason. You can choose to explain that if you want. But you are now your Twitter bio says you're the Dogecoin professor of law and grifting. Which, if you're in the crypto world and you're expert in grifting, you're in the right place.
This is the guy you want to talk to. Right?
Yeah. Well, I'm visioning, right? You got to give yourself the title you wish for.
Oh, true. Yeah, maybe you'll get picked up by the Doge Council. Yeah, we could use some. That's a whole topic in crypto. So you're UK. You're down in UK College of Law, Kentucky.
Yeah. So I'm on the faculty at the University of Kentucky College of Law, where I've taught for a little over a dozen years now. But I live with my wife in New Orleans. She's on the faculty at the Tulane University College of Law. So we live down here, and I commute up to Kentucky to teach.
Oh yeah, I have another friend that, yeah, his wife got a job in Illinois, and he was out here, and he was always here half the time. I'm like, where do you live? I don't understand. And I guess it must be a common thing because you get moved around a lot, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about academic jobs is they're incredibly flexible about everything that you do except for where you live. So, if you want to have an academic job, you kind of have to accept that it may come with some geographical inconvenience. So
are you just like an outlier because the crypto to me is probably making an assumption that like college professors would be kind of not into crypto, like they would look at it.
I mean, I would say that there's a fair number of law professors who are interested in the crypto space for a number of different reasons. Some are kind of pro crypto, some are very anti crypto, but it's a lot of money involved. It's a big industry. Law professors are interested in anything that's a big industry because it
has a lot of money.
Well, it's a lot of money. It's socially significant. So there's a lot of people who spend time thinking about it. I come mostly from a kind of intellectual property space, and so there's a lot of people in the IP world who are interested in crypto. I mean, I think that especially happened after the kind of NFTs started taking off,
right?
And then the bubble sort of burst. But I think NFTs caused a lot of IP professors to start thinking more about how people are transacting in different kinds of knowledge goods in the kind of blockchain space. There's also a lot of law professors coming from the sort of banking regulation, financial transactions regulation space who are really interested in crypto, both as a sort of separate kind of market for financial transactions. And I think also as kind of a window or a kind of a new lens for thinking about financial transactions, thinking about money, right? So I'm thinking people like Carla Reyes or Rowan Gray or Willamette, right, are doing a ton of work in the crypto regulation space and thinking about the relationship between crypto markets and the kind of conventional financial markets, as it were. I mean, it's a niche interest for sure, but there's definitely a lot of people out there in the kind of legal scholarship space who've been.
Yeah, and we've done, like I said, we used to do space. This channel was Litecoin Underground. I was a crypto specific thing for about 3.5 years. In our spaces, I would say we were amateur lawyers in a lot of debates talking about specifically the thing that I find most interesting is the idea of real world asset tokenization. And what I think crypto does is it's a new, like you said, a new lens where there's this thing all of a sudden that like, wait, this is an ungovernable space. Like, how do I govern the ungovernable? And you question yourself, well, what really does need to be governed? And what does it mean to govern something? Like, what does it mean to even to enforce possession? It's just these things that you would never think of in your life, and suddenly you're kind of. It's just an interesting, brain exercise.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? And as someone who's primarily interested in the regulation of ownership, or really the meaning of ownership in intangible goods or knowledge goods, I really got interested in the crypto space, and I'd known about it for a long time. I mean, the Satoshi white paper came out while I was working as a lawyer at Sullivan and Cromwell on Wall Street. I remember hearing about it right at the very. I only wish I'd bought some Bitcoin back in the day, but I was like, wow, that's kind of cool, but not really my area. So whatever. I got interested when the NFT market came out, precisely because I saw it was really interesting to me as a new space in which people were thinking about intangible assets in a new way and thinking about what it means to own intangible assets in a new way. And one of the things that made me really interested about the NFT market, and about the crypto markets as well, was they made a lot of people really upset in ways that those people couldn't articulate, right? And in particular, the NFT market made a lot of people who I spend time thinking about really upset, namely kind of artists and illustrators and other people who are involved in the production of different kinds of works of authorship. Some people were really excited about it, and other people were really angry about it. And the people who were really angry about it often couldn't really articulate what exactly it was that made them so angry. And so that was sort of piqued my interest. That's the kind of thing that's the kind of tell that makes me think that there's something here I should be paying attention.
It feels like, I think in that world, it feels like there's a competitive, people are getting a leg up just by having a specific type of knowledge, or like an ability to tap into a market. I hate to use the phrase access, but it's, can't think of two different worlds of technology and artists, that some people are just, that's not their world, and they lose access to a market. It probably feels like an unfair advantage in some way, but
I think that's
move so quickly too. Like, a lot of people have to jump in feet first just to, to be first.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I also think that one of the things that made a lot of people really upset is that they saw, in a way that they couldn't fully articulate, a kind of harbinger of change in a market that they thought they understood. And I think that really kind of is a nice way of kind of foreshadowing what you wanted me to talk about.
Yeah,
today,
you're getting, I like to just ramble a lot, so you keep me on. Be my rudder here. Bring in on that, but I don't want to talk enough. So
yeah, for me specifically, what the NFT market did in a lot of ways was suggest a kind of transition or the potential for a transition in the market for a lot of works of authorship from a primarily copyright-based scarcity model to a primarily trademark-based kind of clout model, as it were. And I think a lot of people were really uncomfortable about that because they're used to thinking about the market in which they operate in one way. And when they see a change, it's disconcerting to them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to pull up the tweet that kind of triggered why I wanted to talk about this. Do you have any questions, Emil, while I'm looking at this? Sorry, I'm kind of...
Well, you were involved in some NFT projects yourself, right?
I was, yeah. So,
you can't shill. This is a no shill space.
No, absolutely not. I have nothing for sale at the moment, so you can only buy in the secondary market. But yeah, so I was also a securities lawyer before going into NFTs, before going into IP law, and so when the NFT space kind of broke, it was really interesting to me that a lot of people were worried, and I think with good reason, about whether or not they might be subject to regulation for selling NFTs under the securities laws. And so, I started thinking about, well, how can I sort of interact with that concern in productive ways? And so one of the things that I did was create an NFT project that was a kind of deliberate effort to provoke the SEC by explicitly securitizing a project and characterizing what I was doing as a sale of an unregistered security. So what I did was create a conceptual artwork titled SEC No Action Letter Request, And the conceptual art consists of sending a no action letter request to the SEC, proposing to sell a work of conceptual art that I characterize as an unregistered security, and then kind of tell the SEC that, look, this is why what I'm doing is something that you say you should be regulating. Therefore, you should regulate me and tell me I'm not allowed to do what I'm proposing to do. The SEC never took any action, but the NFTs did sell pretty well. Made about 35, 40 grand off that one. And I bought my wife a Mustang GT. So that was
nice.
Right on.
The car that NFTs bought, as it were. And actually right now, Jonathan Mann, Song a Day Man, and I are actually suing the SEC in the Eastern District of Louisiana for a declaratory judgment stating that selling art as NFTs is not a violation of the securities laws. We were actually supposed to have a oral argument on the SEC's motion to dismiss last week, but the court has postponed that for another month and a half or so. So
they really have kicked this crypto can down the road a long time, right?
Yes, they have.
Weird they want to be so vague for so long. Maybe that's part of the tactic.
Well, I mean, I think it was. I think the vagueness and the lack of transparency was in part a reflection of the Biden SEC's, of the kind of the chairman Gensler at the SEC's perspective, and a sort of broader take within the sort of Democratic Biden White House that this kind of whole crypto thing was undesirable, and therefore they should kind of try to tamp it down as much as they possibly could. And so kind of not telling people what they could or couldn't do, not developing kind of regulations that would enable people to more kind of easily create and sell projects, kind of creating that kind of regulatory uncertainty is a way, whether it's a bad way, I think is debatable, but it's a way of discouraging.
It prevents investment.
Yeah, to slow down
time,
the
money.
market. Yeah. But so I'm curious as to what, in terms of blockchain and NFT, would constitute a unique intellectual property that's patentable, right?
Right.
There's
plenty of patents involved when it comes, but it mostly be like software patents would be at issue. So different ways of creating things on the blockchain, different ways of selling things on the blockchain. I mean, a blockchain technology in theory could be patentable, although I'm not sure how relevant patents really are in that space.
Like Bitcoin's open source, so you can't patent at that point, right? Once it's made open source, it's kind of.
Yes, that's true. Right. So, I mean, the way patent law works is it goes to specific inventions and discoveries. So what you're doing is disclosing to the government that you've invented or created a new thing, and you claim exclusive rights to use that new invention for a period of time. Right. So when, for example, Satoshi, whoever Satoshi is, invented the Bitcoin blockchain, to the extent that the Bitcoin blockchain was different from any other blockchain or anything else, any other sort of internet-based crypto platform that had previously existed, in theory, there's the possibility that Satoshi could have said, I created this new thing. No one's ever done it before. No one's ever done it the way that I'm proposing. And I want to claim a patent over this particular method of encrypting information on a blockchain. Right. And if he'd done so and other people use that same method without his permission, then they would be infringing. He could stop them. But of course, that was contrary to his goals. Right.
Well, you couldn't truly stop a copy anyway.
Well, I mean, maybe not, maybe not. But
ideally, if you can't stop Bitcoin, how could you stop a copy?
Well, but you could go after whoever created a new blockchain. If you could identify who that person was, and you could say you've engaged in patent infringement, and if you generate any revenue from this infringement, then you have to pay it to me, or you have to pay me damages for having used my patent without my permission. I would have licensed it to you. You didn't pay for a license. You owe me a licensing fee, plus you owe me penalties on top of the licensing.
But so like a MicroStrategy, for example, can't retroactively patent Bitcoin's technology. No. They can certainly build on top of it and create their own protocols for whatever identity I think is what they're after.
That's right. That's right. And if they create a new tech protocol on top of an existing protocol, right? And I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff, so I'm just going to speak in vague generalities, right? But if whatever new protocol they develop is new and non-obvious, and no one has ever done it quite that way before, in theory, they could file a patent application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office and say, this is this new protocol we've developed. We think it's novel and non-obvious, and we would like you to issue a patent to us for that new protocol. And if the USPTO agreed, they'd issue them the patent, in exchange for paying fees and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I mean, you can patent any kind of new development, even if it's a relatively small kind of new change or new addition to something that's existing. Now, if there'd been an underlying patent, they would have to be concerned about like their use of the underlying patent. But because the Bitcoin isn't patented itself, they could build on top of it. And there are plenty of people who filed blockchain-related patents, whether or not they're enforceable, in practice, whether or not they're valid patents. I have no opinion. I'm not so much of a patent.
Right.
So.
It is extremely interesting. Well, so let me just kind of go, and I know we've been talking about it, but I think this is what brought this up is, so Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, interesting guy. He's a Bitcoiner, and he says his post is delete all IP law, and it got 12 million views. There was a lot of conversation. It's fleeting. This was like 8 days ago, so. April 11th. Yeah, exactly 8 days ago. So it's amazing how something can be interesting for literally 6 hours on Twitter, and then it's something else comes along. But this guy, I don't know if I follow him or not. Yeah, I do. But libertarian, agreed, burn the entire regime. The moment you do, innovation will explode. This is the argument that I find a lot. Culture will accelerate. Technology will evolve in real time. Ideas will stop being hostage to legal fiefdoms and start flowing like code in open source. I mean, this sounds a little bit, this is some grandiose terms. It doesn't protect creators. It protects gatekeepers. It's not about rewarding genius. It's about bottling it, branding it, and turning it into rent-seeking monopoly. It would unleash a real engine of progress. Yeah, iterations, mixing. Okay. And then
the next reply is like the obvious counterpoint to that, right? How do you protect individual artists from their work being appropriated by or consumed by an AI model?
It's something you said interesting there is that you can get patents for. Well, let's because actually this before we get on. There are 4 types of patents or IP protection.
So this is the thing, right? IP or intellectual property is just a blanket term. That we use to describe a whole bunch of different, totally unrelated bodies of law that are intended to protect very different kinds of things for very different reasons, and they do so in very different ways. So the kind of the most important or significant kind of bodies of law we usually put into the IP basket would be patent, copyright, trademark, right of publicity, and trade secret law. There are some other things that we might consider also kind of forms of IP, but those are the 5 kind of big ones that are kind of the when I teach a survey class, those are the ones.
What was the 5th one again?
Trade secrets, right of publicity, copyright, patents, and trademarks. And really, it's patent, copyright, trademark are the big 3, as it were. The other ones are important, but maybe kind of less significant, and especially in kind of thinking theoretically about how intellectual property doctrines work. The one thing that they kind of have all in common with each other is that they protect exclusive rights in intangible goods, right? In other words, we often call them like knowledge goods, as it were, right? And the big difference here, right, is when we think about property, normally we think about exclusive rights in things that are scarce, right? Things where there's only a small amount, things where when you consume the good, there's less of it left over after you're done consuming. The big difference with IP goods or knowledge goods is that they're intangible, which means they're not scarce, right? Which means when you consume them, the quantity, the supply doesn't go down, right? You don't use them up, as it were,
right?
The way you do with other kinds of goods. So I mean, if I've got an apple and I eat the apple, no one else can eat the apple because the apple's gone, right? But if I have a book and I read a copy of the book on the internet, well, an infinite number of people on the internet can read the book at the same time because there's no scarcity of the book or no intrinsic scarcity. So typically what intellectual property rights do is create scarcity where there previously hadn't been any scarcity, right? So when we create a copyright, for example, we say, well, this work of authorship would normally be non-scarce or non-rival is the term that a lot of economists would use. It would be a public good, and anyone who wanted to consume it could consume it. And that would be great, right? Because we want people to consume works of authorship. They derive social value from that. They derive welfare from that. It's good for them, right? To consume whatever it is that they enjoy consuming. They derive utility therefrom, right? But we say, well, we're going to create exclusive rights in that work of authorship, in that book. And we're going to allow the owner of those exclusive rights, whether that's the author or somebody the author has sold those rights to control people's ability to consume this work so that other people will have to pay them typically to consume the work rather than being able to just do it for free, right? And the reason we do that, at least in theory, right, is that we think that while it would be in a kind of static sense good for consumers to be able to consume works of authorship without having to pay for them, right? Because they're non-rival, they're not being diminished by use.
Right,
There's no reason for people not to consume them. They're public goods. But what we're worried about is dynamic efficiency, right? We're worried about the production of these works of authorship in the future, right? So the reason we create these bodies of intellectual property law is in order to regulate for the future, in order to encourage or incentivize people,
right,
create more of these public goods that we think are really valuable. We think of it, we often call this the intellectual property or quid pro quo, right? The something for something, right? So it's the public gives individual authors, inventors, businesses, certain kinds of exclusive rights over the intangible goods that they produce in order to encourage them to produce more of those goods in the future. And the sort of premise of intellectual property law is that the value of the future goods is higher than the cost to the public in the present. In other words, at the end of the day, the public is actually getting a better deal because by imposing a cost on itself through intellectual property law, by giving exclusive rights and then paying to use the works of authorship or the inventions that are produced, you get more works of authorship and invention, and the additional works of authorship, the additional inventions have more social value than the social cost of providing the protection.
So it's almost like this necessary violation of the free market because you're viewing it as a betterment long-term culturally. Like if we're talking about copyright laws, right? It's like funding research instead of funding scientific research, it's funding
that's right,
writing research or art research, but you're doing it like in a odds free market way.
Bingo. That's exactly right. Right. So we have two options. We want to encourage investment in the production of public goods like this, production of knowledge goods. Well, there's two ways of doing it, right? We can do it directly, right, by giving grants or funding directly to the people who we want to have produce these new things, or we can do it indirectly through intellectual property rights, right? And we do this directly, right? The government gives out lots of grants to universities and elsewhere to encourage the production of new inventions and discoveries. The government and private organizations give out lots of grants to authors to produce all manner of kinds of authorship, but we don't think that that's as efficient as it could be because the problem is it's really hard to know who to fund. Right. Sometimes
you don't know what people want, right? You don't know what
people want. You don't know who's going to be productive, right? You might know that somebody's going to produce a work of authorship, but you don't know whether consumers are going to want to consume it, right? And so in order to solve that knowledge problem, as it were, the fact you don't know who to fund, you do it indirectly instead. And you put the burden, you put the risk onto the producers rather than onto the intermediary, rather than on the government. And you say, well, if you produce things and they turn out to be valuable, then you can internalize some of the value of the things that you produce through intellectual property law. If you produce things that turn out not to be valuable, well, too bad for you, right? That means you don't get to consume anything or you don't get any value out of them because you chose to invest in producing something that turned out not to have any social value. So it kind of turns the investment into the production of knowledge goods into a kind of gamble for the producer.
Yeah.
I think you said something else that's really important, right? Which is that fundamentally what intellectual property rights are is a form of regulation, right? What we're doing is adopting a body of regulatory law intended to achieve certain kinds of social outcomes, right? And the reason we do that is that we think we can actually solve market failures through that regulation. In other words, we think that there is a transaction cost of some kind. There's some kind of deadweight loss here that's being created by a market failure, right? That in the absence of intellectual property law, people have insufficient incentive to invest in inventions. They have insufficient incentive to invest in the production of works of authorship, and therefore we're going to get a suboptimal level of production of inventions and of works of authorship. And by engaging in this regulatory intervention, by creating bodies of intellectual property law like patent and copyright, we give people an incentive to invest in these areas where we want to see investment, to invest in innovation. And as a consequence of that increased investment, we solve the market failure, or at least we reduce the market failure and increase.
Now, I think there were, in my lifetime, there were 2 instances. Oh, sorry, I think you got off me. Yeah, I was saying, in my lifetime, there were 2 instances where IP law and copyright law were brought into the public sphere of discussion. First time was with Napster, and that, you know, the fact that people were just pirating songs.
You pirate.
Yeah, well, that's it. Technology enabled people to skirt traditional copyright gatekeepers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to create something called the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And today, I mean, it's the conversation is back in the public sphere because of things like AI and OpenAI and them just ingesting everything that's available to them on the internet to train their models. And so I guess that's what Jack was referring to. I guess he wants open access to information for the language models to improve their capabilities, right?
Yeah. So I think you asked some really big questions there, actually, and I think they kind of fall into 2 categories, both of which have to do with the intersection between the production of works of authorship and the development of new technologies, right? So I'll start by talking a little bit about Napster, because I actually think it's a really great example of how that works with a kind of long historical pedigree, right? So as you say, right, Napster was a tool that enabled people to share songs primarily, but in theory you could file share anything over the internet. Effectively, it was a tool for copyright infringement. It was a way for people to get digital copies of works of authorship that they would otherwise have to pay for. But it was a new technology that was really useful in a lot of ways. And actually, you know, the reason Napster and other file sharing sites are largely not relevant anymore is that the owners of the works of authorship in question have moved to a streaming model instead of a paying per copy model, right? And the irony is, right, that they could have done so in the Napster era as well, right? They could have started streaming stuff. They could have done a Spotify in response to Napster, and Napster never would have caught on, because it turns out people prefer streaming to downloading and owning in a lot of ways. What they want is access, and they don't care about owning the actual copy. They just want to hear.
And that's a whole nother conversation.
Right? And so, but this is an interesting long conversation, because this is a story that's happened over and over again. Right. So, you know, back in my childhood, you know, in the 80s, right, the big argument was over the VCR, right? And when the VCR was introduced,
and mixtapes, right?
The president of the MPAA said, this is like the Boston Strangler for the film business, right? The VCR is going to kill the film industry, because now people will be able to like tape stuff and watch it at home. They won't go to the movies and buy tickets anymore, right? We're all going to go out of business, right? Because of this horrible, horrible new invention. So you got to stop the VCR Congress. You got to prevent.
Every bodega was selling bootlegs, right?
Right, yeah. Right. But it turned out, right, that they were so scared of this new technology that was going to upend their business model. It turned out that the VCR was the best thing that ever happened in the movie business. Their profits just skyrocketed, right? Well, exactly the same thing happened with Napster, right? Napster comes along, file sharing comes along, and the film and music industries, which historically have been in the model, are in the business of selling particular copies, physical copies of music and films, right? They're like, oh no, this is terrible. Now people can share this content on the internet without having to go out and buy a copy, how are we going to make any money? We're going to go out of business, right? Because we can't sell copies if people don't want to buy copies. This is the worst thing ever. You've got to prohibit this. You've got to stop people from doing this. When they finally came around, when Daniel Ek kind of convinced them to eventually license stuff to him to put it on Spotify and distribute it that way, they realized, oh, wait a minute, people just want to consume this stuff and they're perfectly happy to pay for it so long as it's easy. And what was the net result? Well, once again, this technology they thought that was kind of existential for their business model turned out to be a huge boon. And now they're making more money than they ever made before, right? So once again, they were tooth and nail opposed to this new technology. And then when it finally, inevitably, I think, caught on, they realized that, no, actually, this is great for us because it just means even more consumption than it previously existed. And I think that part of what that reflects is the fact that producers often don't see that the demand for these intangible goods, for these knowledge goods that they're producing, is even higher than they realize because consumers are so responsive to transactions costs, right? The cost associated with getting a copy.
Well, it makes you think like what they probably didn't realize is they're in the distribution business, right? They're not in the music creation business.
Right.
And so like creators want to just create, consumers just want to consume. And so I would say in my business world, do well what you do well. Like don't try to be all things to all people. Mm-hmm. But it kind of brings up, because this is one of the things this idea of abolishing IP law. The reason that the music industry, those companies continue to be the leaders in their industry is because they are the leaders of the last iteration of this industry. So they're well funded and they have a very serious advantage over somebody trying to just build their own streaming site or something like that. And if you abolish IP law, again, I'm maybe being a doomsdayer here, I would see it as the winners of yesterday are going to continue to be the winners of tomorrow because they already own the physical, if we're talking about physical things you're going to create, patents. If I own a factory, I'm going to be able to spin up your idea a lot faster than you are because you don't own a factory today. So why would you invent something if you know it's just going to be taken by the existing powerful and produced at a fraction of any cost you could ever make in days rather than, you'd be years behind developing that thing.
Right.
So it would bring good ideas to market faster, but it would squash good ideas. Mm-hmm. So you run out of good ideas, right? Or, I mean,
like, are the artists still benefiting, or is it just Spotify now that's making all the money?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, and it depends on the artist, and it depends on their deal with their label, primarily, right? Mm-hmm. So, in a lot of cases, artists complain about not getting paid very much when they stream on Spotify. Part of the reason for that is, each Spotify stream just isn't that lucrative, right? So you have to have a lot of streams for it to be. Part of it is, if you have a label and you have a kind of a not particularly favorable deal with your label, the label might be collecting most of the Spotify revenue from whatever it is that you recorded for them. But that's between you and the label. That's not Spotify's fault if you cut a bad deal. But to get back to what Grant was saying, right? I mean, what I really think is important here is to remember that we're not talking about IP law in general. We're talking about different bodies of law. Right. So specifically here, if we want to talk about copyright law, right? Well, I think that the point is to ask, what do we want to achieve when we do copyright law in any particular space? What do we want to accomplish? And then we can ask, well, right, is the regulatory activity we're taking that we're engaging in, is the way copyright works in this space accomplishing what we want to accomplish or not? Right. So I would characterize it not so much as a kind of abolish copyright law. There are reasons to, they're coherent, although maybe not.
Can I ask this? Like, have these IP laws existed since the founding of this country?
Well, okay. So the Constitution allows or explicitly authorizes Congress to create patent law and copyright law. And both of those existed in England before the Revolution and in other countries to varying degrees as well. And Congress immediately created patent law and copyright law.
Can I ask you even further back? Like, when's the first concept of protecting an idea.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, this is a question that a professor loves to hear.
Yeah.
Tell me about the first patent.
Yeah. So the first forms of patent law were developed in a kind of piecemeal fashion, largely as a function of the kind of very, very early beginnings of the kind of transition into modernity, right? So as it became the case that industrial production and distribution of manufactured goods became over long distances, right? As trade became increasingly important and trade in manufactured goods became more important, control over the production of those manufactured goods and over new inventions became increasingly valuable. So most people think that the sort of initial versions of patent law were sort of developed in Venice, arguably around Murano glass and other kinds of inventions that were happening in Venice, which was, the largest trading kind of.
Like right around the same time, like central banking came around.
Yeah, well, I think some say maybe banking maybe even a little bit earlier, but yes, largely, right?
Okay.
Copyright law was a kind of offshoot or a byproduct of the invention of the printing press. Right. So prior to the invention of the printing press, the primary cost associated with reproducing works of authorship was handwriting them. Right. Like creating the work of authorship was really expensive. There was no real need to have exclusivity over the work of authorship contained because all the cost was built in.
Just really quick, I went somewhere, I forget, it was some sort of museum or something. They were talking about the printing press.
Yeah.
They said like the year before, up until the printing press was created, there were something like 600,000 copies of the Bible had ever been created in the history of time. And in the year it was created, it was like 60 million got created. Like just some number of years, like, holy crap.
Yeah. Well, so the reason that the printing press was, the reason it caused, or reason it led to the invention, incentivized, as it were, the invention of copyright, was that the printing press dramatically reduced the marginal cost of printing copies of a work of authorship. In other words, the cost of printing of making each additional copy went way down. Didn't go cheap still, but the cost went way down. But it increased the fixed cost of producing works of authorship. In other words, you had to invest a lot of money up front because a printing press only makes sense if you're producing a lot of copies. It doesn't make sense for producing one. So handwriting one copy of the Bible is cheaper than printing one copy of the Bible, but printing 1,000 copies, each copy is way, way, way cheaper than one handwritten copy. So the thing about the invention of the printing press was it meant that that printers had to invest a lot of resources in producing copies of a work of authorship. And so they had a really high fixed cost, and it was uneconomical for them to make that investment unless they could have exclusivity over the market, because otherwise the concern, and I think a realistic concern, was that their competitors would just wait and see what other people printed, right? And see if it was popular. If it was popular, then they would print it too and compete. If it was unpopular, then they wouldn't print it.
Right. Yeah.
So the concern was, well, how do we regulate the market such that the printers can have exclusivity and therefore invest with more confidence in producing multiple?
Yeah, you don't want everybody to be scavengers, right? Just like feasting on the ideas of others.
That's right. So the initial, but really the idea was that we want to encourage printers to invest in printing books because books are good and people want to consume books. And if we don't give them exclusivity, they won't print as many books as we'd like them to, right? And actually, once again, right, copyright wasn't invented in Venice, but Venice developed the sort of earliest kind of full-bore regime of regulating the production of works of authorship for printing privileges.
Sorry,
and that would have been in the 16th century.
So like on its surface though, like almost, I can't imagine somebody thinking that, okay, this guy wrote a book, who cares? We shouldn't. I think most people would say, yeah, of course. I mean, you should be rewarded for your idea. You went and did something. You have a song I love. Of course, I'm going to pay you for it. And it would be really, I mean, gosh, we see it on the internet. People get mad when someone steals a meme, right? Because there's some possession there. So I'm like, hey man, I thought of that,
Sure.
And monetization of memes, that'd be That's something we don't have yet. But
Sure.
but I guess the question is like, what? I can't even imagine the case to say that we should abolish the ability to protect your intellectual property. And I think I asked just a little bit before we got on. Has there been a growth or an expansion to the point that maybe there's some areas where it doesn't feel so logical anymore? You go, wait a minute, you shouldn't be able to protect yourself from this or that. Like what are maybe the grayest areas, or where maybe what Jack is generalizing his anger or whatever, his idea at something, when maybe it's just a few portions of IP law that he finds offensive, the ones that probably impede his business model, I would imagine.
Right. Right. Well, I think what you got to do is think about this in two different ways, because I think people have two different ways of conceptualizing what specifically copyright law is for. So on one level, there's the kind of economic utilitarian view of copyright that I've been describing. It's just a regulatory tool for encouraging investment in the production of new works of authorship. And we can just evaluate whether or not it's economically efficient in determining whether or not we like the way the regulations are working. But there's also what we call kind of a more deontological or moral view of copyright, which says that people are entitled, somehow metaphysically entitled, to own and to exert control over the works of authorship that they create, whether that's because of their investment of labor, whether that's because the work of authorship is a reflection of their personality and personhood, right? However,
and just like you would want to reward the guy who figures out how to efficiently chop wood, you'd say, well, let's make that his best thing. So the people that are good at creating ideas that people love, you want to encourage, like you want them to keep doing it because that's good for everybody, right?
Absolutely. But I think that that kind of mixes a little bit of the two, right? That it's good for society if we encourage this person to do what they're good at by giving them some exclusivity, and it's the right thing to do. We're recognizing their contribution in an appropriate way, and this actually comes back a little bit to the question you asked before, like where did intellectual property law come from? Well, I would argue that on some level, the earliest form of intellectual property law is the concept of plagiarism, right? Because the idea of plagiarism is you can characterize it as a rule of mandatory attribution, right? Which means it's an obligation to attribute a particular work of authorship to a particular person. Now that's a pretty thin form of copyright, but I think it's kind of a version of copyright, or at least kind of a version of ownership of a work of authorship. And we can trace the concept of plagiarism all the way back to the Roman Republic and ancient Greece, right? So the term
in today's world, right? Like where you remember last week we had these Studio Ghibli memes, right? That were popping up all over X. So it's cool if an AI model ingests these things, right? Assuming they have to pay a license fee to do so, probably some kind of corporate license fee that's higher than what you and I would pay for a movie ticket. But okay, so they ingest it, and then their works are now derivative, right? They're creating new derivations of art based on Studio Ghibli's style. How does copyright work into that? Is that like?
So this is a really interesting question, and I think one of the reasons. Well, there are two different things going on here, right? And I'll talk. I think, I'll talk about them separately, right? So from a purely doctrinal copyright law perspective, AI models are a problem, right? Because copyright doctrine doesn't really have great tools to think about them, right? Because they work in ways that copyright law doesn't really anticipate. Right. So when we think about the relationship between copyright and AI models, there's, I think, really deep questions about whether AI models are infringing either on the front end or on the back end. And I think the more important question really is whether we think it should be infringing for AI models to the way they interact with copyrighted works to be infringing. Again, whether on the front end or on the back end. So I think there's really two big copyright questions that are posed by AI in relation to infringement. The first is, does training an AI constitute infringement? And the second is, can the products of an AI model be infringing? And if they are, is the AI model or the owner of the AI model liable, or should they be liable for that infringement?
Like, can these memes be copyrighted by Studio Ghibli? right? Like
probably, I mean, it depends, but probably not, right? Because the reason we call it Studio Ghibli is because it looks like the Studio Ghibli style, but copyright doesn't protect the style, right? Anyone can produce new works of authorship in the Studio Ghibli style. And if they do so, as the producer of that work of authorship, they're the copyright owner of that work of authorship. And Studio Ghibli has no claim over that, no copyright claim over that. In theory, they could have like a trademark or trade dress claim for producing something, but that would only be if you said to other people, this is a Studio Ghibli product, right? Or let them believe it was a
pass it off as that branding.
Yeah, if you engage in a trademark violation, okay, maybe. But from a copyright perspective, that's not infringing.
So like, just like people make a shirt with the Coca-Cola script, as long as it doesn't say Coca-Cola.
That's right. As long as a reasonable consumer wouldn't believe that the source of that product is Coca-Cola or Studio Ghibli, then there's no trademark infringement, and therefore no problem there.
Dude,
right?
this is like an infinitely interesting topic to me.
Yeah.
So it's so layered. Because I'm thinking about the AI models. What they're doing is they're going, well, the computer did it. I didn't do it. Yeah. But they are monetizing the product, whatever that thing produces.
Yes. Yeah. But the thing is what the AI model is doing is analyzing a whole bunch of different works, right, in order to find relationships between the parts of those works, right? It's essentially a machine for finding deep patterns about how people create works of authorship of different kinds that kind of reverse engineers them and uses them to generate new works of authorship that are similar to previous ones that have already been created. And the irony of the kind of the training issue, right, is that merely consuming the work of authorship itself, that isn't infringing, right? We call that a private.
As long as you paid for it, whatever charge is supposed to be charged. Yeah.
I mean, if you have a copy of a book and you reading it 2 or 3 times, you don't have to pay another fee every time you read it, right? There's no exclusive right to control the use of the work of authorship once you have a legitimate copy. The only real question, the copyright question posed by training an AI, is that there's, technically speaking, a necessity to create a digital copy, typically, in order to train the AI. Now, that digital copy isn't copied into the AI model. All the AI model is doing is analyzing the relationships between the parts of the work that is being trained on.
It is shaped by that, though. It is shaped by the media, and like it is not the same after.
But importantly, not in a copyright relevant way, right? Because none of what's being copied are the actual parts, the actual expressions.
That would be like
because as a human being, when you see when you watch a movie or listen to a song, you're forever changed after, right? And everything you do after that is derivative of what you've.
Well, but not in a copyright sense. Not in a copyright sense. Right. So when we say something's a derivative work in a copyright sense, what we're saying is that the new work contains a copyrightable element of the previously existing work.
Some sort of significant element to it. Yeah. Okay.
Some element that is sufficiently original to the original work that we think it would be infringing. Right. And mere similarity isn't necessarily enough, right? You actually have to copy something about the original that makes the two works substantially similar to each other. So that brings us to the second question, which is on the back end, right? Obviously, people can use an AI model to generate new works that might be infringing on previously existing works. As everyone knows, it's not too hard to get an AI model to produce something that, if produced by a person and sold commercially, would be an infringing work. Right. So can that be infringing? I think the easy answer there is yes. Right. Is it possible for an AI generated work to be infringing of previously existing work? Absolutely. In the same way that any other work that you generate could be.
So what do you think Jack's motivate? Like, what is it, the thing that he's seeing that's saying, I gotta make you think like Jack Dorsey here for a second. Is there some major speed bump that AI is having that?
Well, I mean, I think he's probably thinking in part about AI, but I think he's also speaking to a mindset that is much broader and has existed for quite some time. A kind of often people call like a free culture type mindset. And I think the observation there is that, as I said earlier, right, the reason we created copyright law in the first place was as a regulatory regime intended to make the market in works of authorship more efficient. And if we take that model of copyright, then it implies, or it follows, that we should be evaluating the regulation we're doing to see how efficient it is, right? Like, how much is it encouraging people to invest more in producing works of authorship? And are there cases where it's imposing costs rather than creating benefits? Right. And so we should kind of
discouraging creativity where we, it's having the opposite effect what we originally.
Just think about it, right?
And in law, no offense, and lawyers can get into the weeds in cases, and like you just said earlier, like I did this case just to see what would happen. Like, sometimes we start shaping the law over time, right? I'm sure
and think about the nature of the copyright regime you've created. If you start thinking about the details, right? Well, copyright, what does it apply to? Essentially everything, right? It's automatic, right? How do you get a copyright? You automatically get a copyright every time you create an original work of authorship, right? So we're recording a video right now.
Right.
When we're done recording, you guys are going to own a copyright in this video that you just created. Whether or not,
like, without a official whatever, if somebody tried to monetize it, you could always make your case, I was the original creator.
No, I'm saying as a copyright law essentially says that you two are co-authors of this video that we're creating right now, because I'm not participating in the recording, right? You guys set it up, you guys are recording it, you guys are the copyright owners of the video.
I'm gonna need you to send me a few dollars for
but the point is, I suspect you didn't even think about that, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Was copyright motivating you to create this video? No, because you're motivated by all kinds of other economic and personal factors that have nothing to do with copyright. Every tweet you send, every Instagram photo you post, every Facebook post you make, every email you send, they're all protected by copyright automatically, whether or not you want it. Right?
This is so wild to me. So, like, what about people that, like the guy last week, we shared a video of this guy who, it was kind of a heartwarming story. He went to barber college. He was just proud of himself. We just like to promote stuff like that. And I actually went back. I've been talking to him a bit on TikTok, and he's like, dude, I've gone viral in a way, right? He's like, I don't know how to handle it. I got thousands of messages coming in. And there are probably people taking his video, putting it on the newscast. They're putting it on, or got even worse. Some people end up on TMZ, or they become a meme, and it gets monetized infinitely by YouTube streamers and all that. How does somebody claim it? Like, how do you even capture something like that?
Well, okay. So, here's an example of that same question, right? I mean, if the idea behind copyright law is we want to give people an economic incentive to create a work of authorship, right? Well, then we should be asking, how much of an incentive do people need, right? This guy created the video. Did he have any expectation of going viral or making money off of it? No, he created it anyway, though. So if he didn't need an incentive on the front end to create it, what's the social benefit in giving him some sort of exclusivity or claim over profits generated from it in the future, right? We didn't need to give him those additional profits. Should we? Right? Does he have a sort of existential or moral right to internalize some of that value to some of those profits, even though he would have created the video anyway?
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe.
No, you're right. And will people create even without that incentive? Of course they will. Right. But is there
because again,
you need protection of an industry?
If our theory of copyright is the reason copyright is justified is because we need to give people copyright in order to incentivize them to produce. Well, if that's true, if that's our theory, then it would actually be inefficient and wrong to give people copyright protection and copyright incentives that they don't want or need. Right. And so what does that tell us? Well, that's an argument to make copyright narrower. It isn't an argument to eliminate copyright.
No, because think about like a tweet, tweets can go viral, and Jack lives and watches people produce content all day with no expectation. And he's monetized that activity since the day he launched Twitter. You know what I mean?
But think about it. By contrast, right? When a movie studio makes a film, right, they're investing millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in producing the film, right, because they expect to make a profit on the back end by selling or streaming or otherwise using copies of what it is that they produce. Does the movie studio need a copyright incentive? Hell yes, right? Because they're investing a lot of resources in producing a good that they think is going to have economic value in the future. So is copyright good at incentivizing movie studios? Absolutely. Is copyright good at incentivizing tweeters and Instagrammers? I'm not so sure, right?
Right. Yeah, probably not. It's not even a part of their mind.
It's not really.
They're going to monetize something they're monetizing their content in a different way.
That's right.
And actually, the spread of their content is good for them because it grows their brand, right?
That's right. That's right. And so then part of it is, if we create stronger copyright protections for those kinds of works, it means it's harder or more risky for people to circulate those kinds of works, which means it's less likely that the person is going to go viral, right? Because people are going to be less likely to circulate it, which means that all the value that they want to claim might actually just evaporate. It's kind of a, killing the goose to lay the golden egg.
Yeah. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth.
Right. So part of the idea behind we should have less IP protection is that it reduces transactions costs on people circulating works of authorship, which encourages them to circulate it more, right? Which means
to the benefit of the distributors.
Sure, but it redounds to the benefit of the brand of the person who's being distributed. Brands are valuable. Brands come with commercial goodwill, right? If you're an influencer, you want people to circulate your content as much as possible, because what you're monetizing at the end of the day is your brand, right?
But I think, and most people know that, so they don't actively try to enforce their copyrights,
right?
Which tells me that.
But the thing is, copyright exists, and copyright imposes transactions costs on people using works of authorship, whether or not you're enforcing them, right? So if I'm someone who wants to use a video, I might be worried about potential copyright infringement if I use a video without someone's permission, even though I suspect they might want me to use it in that way, right? And it's costly. It's difficult for me to contact them and ask for permission. So in a lot of cases, I'm just going to say, well, it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the trouble. I'm just not going to do it. Right.
Yeah, like I think about the videos on YouTube where people play. I don't even understand how they get it. You play 10 seconds of a song, they're going to tell you can't do this. But some people do like reaction videos. And some of those companies you'll click on a video and it'll just be silence because
this is very story, right? So and Anna mentioned this earlier, I think, right? So in the early days of the internet, the Congress passed the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And the idea was to sort of police copyright on social media, initially on YouTube, but eventually other places. And the initial move of copyright owners, when they saw their songs or videos or whatever being put on YouTube, was to send takedown notices and say, you're not allowed to do that. The only way this is going to be on YouTube is if we put it there or we permit it, and we don't want you using our copyrighted content on YouTube. But then YouTube added advertisements, which generated revenue that went to the poster of the video. And what it did was say, well, if you're the copyright owner and you see somebody using your copyrighted content on YouTube without your permission, you have two options. You can either take it down or you can have the ad revenue directed to you. Well, guess what, right? Now, 99% of copyrighted content just stays up and the ad revenue goes to the copyright owner rather than to the poster.
They all saw everybody getting rickrolled.
Interesting.
They saw Rick Astley get rich again.
Exactly.
And they went, whoa.
Now all of a sudden, they've got a bunch of other people essentially selling their works for them, right? So they turn lemons into lemonade, as it were.
Yeah, there's a guy, Rick Beto. I don't know if you know him on YouTube. He's like an old music producer, and he does videos all the time talking about old music and just analyzing how the song was made, and it's really interesting. And but he has artists that he still these days like, why would you not want me to play your song? I have millions of followers. Like, this is good for you, but there's just certain bands or record companies that just don't want it. Like I know, like Led Zeppelin famously would never let people use their songs in commercials, and you're like, why wouldn't you want like a movie to associate an amazing movie with your song? It's like you're making it a forever moment. But
exactly, and this is transactions costs associated with copyright. And the additional problem, right, is what if on one level it's copyright makes it difficult and expensive to use the works of authorship that you want to use, right? What's more, there's a speech problem, right? So we kind of assume that copyright owners are kind of rational economic actors and using their works in rationally economic ways. They're trying to maximize revenue. But everyone knows that's not true, right? People use copyright to control the speech of others all the time, right? In theory, copyright is about encouraging people to speak. It's about encouraging speech, but it's about encouraging speech by creating property rights in speech. So there's an inherent First Amendment free speech problem, because what copyright does on one level is enable copyright owners to drag in the government into forcing other people to shut up, right? To not use their works in ways that they disapprove of. Right now, we pretend that that's not happening, but everyone knows that that is happening. Right. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we square copyright protection of expressive works, right? Works that consist of speech with our commitment to protecting the freedom of speech, protecting people's ability to express themselves. One of the ways we do that is through the fair use doctrine, which says that certain kinds of uses are per se not infringing. Right, so you can do those things without the permission of the copyright owners. One of those would be criticism, right? So, copying from a book would be infringing, right? But if you copy from a book for the purpose of reviewing the book, right? Like you say, boy, this author's a real moron, and here's a couple of sentences from their book that'll prove what a moron they are. Well, that they don't like that. They don't want you to do that, but they can't stop you, right?
Okay.
You're copying for the purpose of criticizing the original. It's not a substitute for the original, right? And so they don't have any way to prevent you from doing that. And those kind of reaction videos and whatnot, they're kind of a subgenre. We might call them a kind of like unsophisticated form of criticism.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, sometimes it's not critiquing, it's just listening and enjoying, right? Yeah. Like, this is
cool. Yeah, showing a reaction to it.
The fact that people are watching it for the reaction, right, rather than watching it for the original, or at least they're watching it for both, right, says to me that this is the kind of thing where the two aren't a substitute for one another. If I really like a song or I really like a video, I'm going to listen to the song or watch the video. I'm not going to watch this reaction thing because this reactor is annoying, right? They're getting in the way of me appreciating the underlying thing that I work with.
So there's got to be a way, like, this is interesting because like blockchain could really be used for a way to sell the right to use, like a one-time use of a song. Hey, $5, click, you get it. And you have some sort of receipt that you could post on the screen, right? That anybody could scan and go, yep, that's a valid. Although then we get into like copying the valid, but make the cost small enough that it.
There are plenty of people trying to work on ways to make that kind of market transaction feasible. I think the mechanics of it are hard, and I think also the kind of market social aspects of it are hard to make actually work. But there's plenty of other people who've had that thought. I've spoken to people who are trying to set up a kind of blockchain-based system of licensing.
Yeah, you need some sort of like revolving validators so that you can't constantly, because you can't copy the proof, right? You can't copy the receipt and just have 100 people copy. But even so,
a platform that's unanimously agreed on, right? You need someone to be, I don't know, maybe like an Apple or Spotify to start it off, where they already have.
Why YouTube isn't doing that today? I would think YouTube would love to be the broker on a million sales. I mean, like, think how many sales dollars would come in, and they take 5% of it, and they give a stamp of approval. They regulate how the laws are managed so that they know any video that goes up with content is valid, and that would make the.
Well, I mean, I would say like the AdSense thing that I was talking about. Right?
Yeah.
Where the ad revenue from posting copyrighted content just gets redirected to the copyright owner. That's kind of a version of what you're describing.
Yeah, but it hinders. It does it in a way that doesn't allow for maximum content.
Well, no, but I think on some. I mean, it doesn't allow for the changing of the content, at least as much as we might otherwise want it to, right? But it does encourage people to post more stuff to YouTube, right? Or rather, it reduces the transactions costs on the stuff being taken down, right? Because people are already posting copyrighted content. They might stop if they see it get taken down all the time. But if they see it stay up, then they'll keep doing it and they'll keep doing more of it. And the ad revenue gets directed to the copyright owner. So now the copyright owner doesn't have an incentive to take it down, right? So we do solve at least one of these kind of transactions costs associated with encouraging the distribution of the works of authorship. And again, it's kind of in a clunky way, and it's not as sexy as like a blockchain-based solution might
because I've done a video before and had the song comes up and it comes back to you and says, look, you got it. We're going to basically mute this part of the video if you want to keep it up. And to me, if they at that point said, look, you can keep it the same, but it's going to cost you $3 to use this song, I would go, yeah, I'll just pay the $3.
Or how about how about a percentage of your ad revenue?
Right. Unless you have none.
No, but I mean, if you
not
have
naming any names.
if you have no ad revenue, then what's the point in stopping you from using it, right? You're not harming anyone.
Right. You've not monetized anything. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, so why do they then? Why do they?
Well, it's because copyright is a blunt tool, right? And
They don't want to take the. It's not worth fighting that fight.
From the copyright owner's perspective, there's no incentive to make it easy to use their work of authorship. What they want to do is force people to come to them with payment, right?
But you are in a way.
Well, yeah, but
with the AdSense, you are, because you can't monetize.
Right.
Although, realistically, we have a sponsor to the show. But that's a workaround way.
But again, right, the thing is, copyright owners didn't create the YouTube AdSense model. Google did, right? And it was because Google had an incentive to maximize the amount of content that was being uploaded to YouTube and staying on YouTube, right? The copyright owners individually didn't have an incentive to do that, right? So it took relying on the business that had a financial incentive to solve that market failure, to get the market failure solved. The copyright owners couldn't do it on their own, even though at the end of the day, the copyright owners end up reaping a significant fraction of the benefits, right? They didn't have the ability to coordinate to solve that problem.
Wow.
So they just automated the process.
That's right.
I feel like, we were talking yesterday and we're like, oh, well, how long are we going to be on? I'm like, oh, maybe an hour or something. And I think we just, in an hour, I feel comfortable with copyrights. I haven't even gotten to patents or any of this other stuff. I know you got to go soon.
Yeah, I got to run and
I feel like this is just an infinitely interesting conversation, because it's so much, the law is so much about language and interpretation of intent. And yeah, like you're talking about, are we getting the net result of the initial spirit of the law, or has it been twisted in a way that's produced something we don't actually want? And
Well, and I'll leave you with this. Another thing that Jack might have been thinking about, right, was the fact, how long does a copyright last? Well, currently the default copyright term is the life of the author plus an additional 70 years. So really the answer is it might as well be forever, right? Is that efficient? Do people need a copyright to last for 100+ years in order to have an incentive to produce things, right? Those things are going to be forgotten next week, never mind 100 years.
Maybe 15 or 20 years. Think about a career, a job you would have. 10 years, that's a long, okay, you got paid 10
years. Initially back in the 18th century, right, when copyright was first created in the United States, the term was 14 years, and you could get an additional 14 years if you wanted to. In other words, if the work was still valuable after 14 years, you could renew it and claim another 14 years of protection.
What triggered the length of time? Corporations trying to protect ideas for...
Copyright owners who kind of hit the jackpot turned out produced something that was really popular, and they wanted to continue having exclusivity because people were still consuming the work many years in the future.
So how is it that the creators of the Constitution got everything so right, and we've just made it worse over time? You know what I mean? They do minimal law. They wanted minimal infringement, but they were very selective about when they chose to bring the government into play.
Yeah. Well, I think it's when people had economic interests, and when additional exclusivity, when additional protection redounded to their benefits, they would go to the government and lobby the government to add new things to the Copyright Act, for example, in order to give them more protection, which really meant more way to extract value from whatever work it was.
Protect their ideas. Yeah, the idea of a corporation itself, right? It's protecting.
Yeah. Well,
it's protecting themselves from competition. Is really
and copyright policy is pressed by authors as much as by companies and distributors, as much as by the middlemen, right? In part because I think authors have internalized the value of ownership. It's meaningful to authors to be able to say, I own this and I can control it, right? I think then the question is, well, how much control do we think that authors should have, right? Maybe we want them to internalize the value of what it is that they produced. Do we want them to be able to stop people from using it in ways they disapprove? I think that's a harder question.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I'm not exaggerating. I want to study IP law now, but I'm too old to go to the university. I'm 46 next week, so I don't know. Maybe I'll just be an old patent lawyer.
Well, if you're interested in IP law, I actually have a whole series of videos on YouTube.
You do? Okay.
where I basically teach an intellectual property class. So you're
what's the hang on, I
if
got
you
your
go to
link.
my YouTube page is Brian L. Fry, just all one word. And there's a couple channels on there that are all about copyright and intellectual property law. So
Oh yeah.
you can go ahead and check that out. And I have lots of papers if you really want to get in the weeds.
I may have you come back in. I really feel like we didn't even tap into too much of like
anytime. Always happy to come on when you've got a copyright or other intellectual property related questions.
Yeah, okay. Well,
Awesome.
yeah, and we do spaces and stuff. Maybe I'll hop in there and we'll have weird conversations. That's what we do.
Anytime, I'm always happy.
Yep. I think you got a brunch to get to, so go do your thing.
All right.
And, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Here, I'm up. Man, am I crazy or like do you get what I'm saying? That stuff really gets my wheels turning, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I mean it's fascinating how much technology is pushing the limits of these regulations and IP law, and I'm interested to see what will happen in the future. You know what I mean?
I definitely came more as we spoke. I started to really understand the idea of the abolishment of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about it is that the foundation is there's still, even though you want to distribute it freely as much as possible, we all still kind of agree that some of that money should flow back to the creator. It's just maybe
the artists need to get compensated. Otherwise, what are they doing it for? Right?
Yeah. Well, but like he said, a lot of people create content. A lot of people go on YouTube and write a song with no expectation at all. So it's more I like the idea of that maybe you have to apply for the copyright. Like I'm making a movie. I'm going to go because I know up front I intend to monetize this thing at some point in time. Then maybe I have to apply for it, where just kind of inherently having it seems kind of strange, right? Like a video of myself and a funny, guy fell off a boat or something. It becomes funny, and I post it because it's for my own enjoyment, and it ends up being monetized. Like do I really own that? Does the guy in the video own it? How much right does he have? Does he have a copyright claim on being in a video that he didn't create? Right? Probably we would say no, but
right.
In reality, you would say, yeah, shouldn't the guy who got hit in the face with a water balloon, shouldn't he be the one that benefits, not you who held the camera?
I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, we apparently have a copyright on this video, which is fantastic. I hadn't thought about it, frankly, up until now.
Yeah, I would have always thought it was kind of something you had to apply for. I mean, you could probably work backwards and say, okay, yeah, again, like the guy we talked about on TikTok, I've been communicating with him, and I sent him a link to the video last week, and I said, hey, you're about the hour mark, check it out. We talked about you a little bit, and he shared it on TikTok. So again, if that, and I don't think his audience is interested in you and I, but if he makes money off that, am I mad or am I just happy because it's going to bring me a lot of new people? Right. So I wouldn't even bother to make the claim. But if I made a movie and I knew ahead of time my intent is to make money off this, then that's different. So you're either lagging or you're incredibly.
Yeah, I mean, right?
It froze on you like this. It's like you were sleeping.
Sorry about that.
So let's change gears a bit. We talked a bit about. Well, I guess do you have anything else to say? I don't want to cut you off if you had something else.
No, I was just saying that a lot's changed since the days of Napster, right? The whole streaming element has come into play. These platforms have adjusted to the technology and to the regulations. And yeah, they're going to have to readjust, I guess, for the advent of AI.
Well, it shows you the real value is being in that marketplace, right? To be the distributor. I always said that about like eBay, right? eBay, they don't care. They just want volume. They just want to take a piece of what moves. So whatever they can do to encourage transactions or consumption, that's their main goal. and the distributors end up being the ones that hold the power in a way.
Mhm.
So like I've even heard like Uber Eats, right? This is gonna be kind of a weird analogy, but I've heard they're an extremely, I guess they're pretty powerful in the world of restaurants, because if you don't participate in Uber Eats, you lose access to a lot of customers.
Yeah.
And so they become able to kind of squeeze these restaurants more and more because they're the platform people engage with, or maybe it was Yelp or something like that. It was some of these
Or Uber Eats.
go-between companies.
Yeah, a bit of both actually. Yeah, it depends. But
Right.
certainly for selling of the food and for deliveries, Uber Eats
So
is
the
the
fact,
king. Then you'll have like DoorDash or something and whatever.
so the fact they have an algorithm or a way of writing something that the end result is puts them in a monopolistic type of position, and that another company can't just take that concept and replicate it. I get it. It's, it is discouraging to innovation, and it actually, puts little mafiosos in charge of, protecting your business, and you can't do business without them, kind of thing.
And
Yeah,
like, what about in the
really
future,
wild.
right? When you have a prompt or the ability to say like, draw me up an 8-episode miniseries about a duck and a dog going on this adventure trying to find a ring or whatever, and
Right.
then this AI creates this 8-episode series, and it's actually pretty good. You show it to some kids, and maybe the kids will show it to their teachers, and the teachers will show it, in a class, hypothetically, and it becomes pretty popular. Who gets the IP right?
Yeah.
Is it the person who created the prompt, or is it the machine that generated the product?
Right. Yeah, because that would be the interesting step for Jack to take, is that if he
Right.
has an AI model, to start trying to claim copyright over the material produced with his AI model. Yeah, this is wild. And it's all about the speed of communication. Like he said, the printing press is what really prompted it, because you can create, imagine when you can train an AI to communicate, which the people are probably doing this, to go prompt AIs infinitely, you're going to create infinite work. I don't know how you catch a hold of this thing. It's going to happen. It's going to happen so fast. We're multiplying. We have something that is infinitely faster than this, and we can multiply it on top of itself. So it becomes so much more effective and efficient at creating content than we could ever be. It can probably even test audience, use other AIs to say, is this funny? Will this be popular? Will this be popular? I don't know. We'll find out. Maybe we'll all end up back just watching live performances and just ignoring anything that's pre-recorded.
Yeah, anything that's generated. Yeah.
I like spaces and I like podcasts because it's people speaking, right? It's natural conversation. Can that ever be replicated? I don't know. Well, so let's shift over into the whole RFK thing.
Yeah. Okay.
We like to run the gamut here, and let me see if I can find that video. Hang on.
Well, I got one clip I can share, about it, but this is what I learned about the whole RFK situation. I had no idea it had to do anything with autism, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And
are you going to play the crypto one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I thought he was spot on here with this whole thing. I'm not sure why people.
All right. So this is RFK. This was during his address. He specifically. Hang on. Let me.
Yeah, you can see here.
He describes
RFK.
Crypto traders. Okay.
RFK describing crypto traders.
And these are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And these are kids.
I mean,
no lies detected. I don't want to make I'm a little uncomfortable. I don't want to make light of this, right? Because we're but also, yeah, that is pretty funny. It feels accurate from what I hear at all the conventions, they also don't bathe themselves regularly. That's the only feedback I see from females in the crypto space, is that crypto bros don't bathe. But
Or know how to
we're a
talk.
unique. That's why I had to, I had to disassociate myself a little bit. No, but so okay, that's basically the clip. And I will say, initially, I thought there was a connection. I thought he had prefaced those statements with a portion, or 25% of these people, meaning autistic people, not these people. But I did. I went back and read the transcript. Right? He did not actually say that. He did not, in that speech. He didn't say it. He, of course, knows it. And well, anyway, so he had this speech, and he says, this is an endemic problem. We have growth in the numbers where I think in California, he said 1 in 12.5 boys are diagnosed with autism today, which is
an increase from 1 in 36. Yeah, it's an increase from 1 in 36 2 years ago, which is about 480% over 2 years. So how did that happen? Is that just a question of them getting better at detecting it, or loosening the what it means to be autistic definition?
Well, so let me go through this. So that's saying, that's 8%, 8 out of 100 kids. And then of that, 25% of them, this is the statistics that are today. Maybe it's being diluted, but from where the math is today, 25% of those kids are in the condition what Robert Kennedy described. They are verbal. I've seen videos. They're often very aggressive, and they can't take care of themselves. They're essentially a lifelong dependent. They can't be a productive member of society, as we would put that. And that, not to demean them, it's not to say they're like, not worth considering, but it's just a reality. And so that tells me, that number says 2% of boys born in California are disabled for life. And he's saying, like, this is not normal. There's something going on here. And we know his whole thing is vaccines, and that's where a lot of
heavy metals in them and whatnot.
And I actually can see both sides. I have a lot of thoughts about vaccines and but I haven't done enough of my own personal looking into it to really make a declarative statement one way or the other. They're obviously a part of the equation. They're a new introduction in the past 30 years where we'd say autism has spiked.
And there's a lot more research being done into it as well.
I would say the studies as of today, I think from my understanding, almost exclusively saying that vaccines are not causing autism. But so there's a couple things that go on here. So what happened, I guess the reason I want to bring it up is that the reaction to his video, I was flabbergasted by. I was literally like, there were so many people, again, are they bots, are they paid, who knows, to say, we're on Twitter going, well, my son's autistic and he graduated from college and he has a job and he's perfectly functional. RFK, you're disgusting, kind of thing. And I was like, he's not talking about this. And I had a buddy of mine that kind of played that a little bit, and I'm like, you're being dumb on purpose. You know exactly.
No, it's a knee-jerk reaction.
About, right?
Yeah, it's just a knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
And it's sad because we're not actually discussing the issue at hand now. We're just discussing this character, the character of the person saying it. When the issue does deserve attention.
You're breaking up a little bit. I'll go on. So, because you mentioned it, you broke up a bit there, but you mentioned why it's getting the attention. And like again, I have these things sometimes where an issue comes up, and you ever get this where you're just like, you're like, how is it? You find yourself angry, and you're like, why is this making me so angry?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is because it's a purposeful distraction from the issue at hand, which is a very serious issue. like this is, again, when you talk about the fabric of your country, if you got 2% of men just incapable of producing, and not only that, a burden on society financially and, with resources and everything else, then it becomes like, how are you joking about this? This is not something to be playing games about.
Right. It's a topic that should be looked into seriously, especially if it does seem that it's becoming more of an epidemic or endemic, right? Like, if what he's saying is true, if the information, the data that he's got is accurate, it needs to be dealt with. We need to figure out what's causing it, and we need to stop it from happening.
Right.
Because we don't know. Like, okay, so some people are saying it's vaccines, other people are saying it's just better screening, whatever. I'd be worried to have a kid and to have them take like 72 vaccines or something by the time they're 10 years old. If I knew there was a chance, if we don't know conclusively that it's not the cause of it, I think it's okay for people to question, especially when their children's lives are at stake, and they shouldn't be demonized for it. Yeah, I know. I hope we get to the bottom of it. I really do. And no, it sucks for the people that certainly suffer from it and that saw this video and felt like they were being attacked. I don't think anyone wants to attack them. I think if anything, they want people to suffer less, and to pervert the message and to just make it political, right? It's kind of, yeah.
Well, yeah, I almost feel like sometimes I probably should just keep my mouth shut, particularly on Facebook. Because there was a friend of mine who he was diagnosed a few years ago. Not a I'm not gonna say a good friend, somebody actually at my curling club. And I wouldn't ever in a million years have been like, oh, he's autistic. Like I could see maybe he had some forms that made learning difficult for him or something that I don't know about, but he in no way would have presented to me as somebody that was autistic. But he's been diagnosed, so it's very personal to him. And that's, again, some of the issue here is it feels like this is such a broad term to blanket everybody with. It just feels like a really strange use of, I don't know, it feels like a manipulation of the language in a way that we bear the real problem, the people we're very concerned about are being blended in with people that are able to do all the things he just said, right? That aren't nonverbal.
Sure.
And so it's a very gray area. And so, yeah, people personalize, well, I have autism, so I'm fine. Anything you say about autism, you're saying about me. And it becomes this like subset. And now it's almost like weirdly a political movement. And I've been told it's natural. There's always been, it's always existed. And that to me is the gaslighting of it. It's like, yeah, 2% of boys my age aren't living in some sort of assisted living home. That's just not true. And so there's some bullshit going on here somewhere, right? You can't square those two facts.
Just to slightly switch topics, have you heard of the telepathy tapes?
Yes, I have heard of it, but I've never watched it or anything. Oh, you talked about this at one point in time.
Yeah, I've brought this up before.
How real it was.
I'm gonna add my my thing to this page here. So the telepathy tapes, it's a podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and stuff. Essentially, it explores the world of non-speaking individuals with autism.
Okay.
And how they're seemingly able to communicate telepathically with each other, with their caregivers. I listened to I think there's like 10 episodes, about halfway through, maybe 6 or 7 episodes in. It's really fascinating. I don't know how real, but if there is some truth to it, it's certainly not being discussed in any scientific spheres. It's not taken seriously at all. Um, yeah, so Vice argues that the podcast popularity might be due to a post-COVID zeitgeist where people are more open to fringe theories. Certainly. Oh, excuse me. But I mean, I think it'd be pretty wild if there was something to it, and I feel like we should investigate this seriously and make it less of a fringe thing. Get some real scientists, maybe
I don't know.
Harvard or
I've just seen so much of that stuff get gamed over time, you know.
yeah,
Did
exactly.
you ever see the one where they showed these kids that like, yeah, they could teach them how to like, yeah, be telepathic essentially, and they would hold cards up, and these kids would have these blindfolds on.
Well, this is what they do here, yeah.
Yeah, but then there was somebody I saw that actually bought some of those blindfolds, and like you can see, it'll look like it's on them, but it'll be like just tilted up a little bit so they can see underneath them. And I don't know, man. Like to me, I look at this and go, if this were true, wouldn't they just use this to like question criminals?
For sure. I mean, yeah.
You know, we know.
Yeah, they can only be gaslighting a whole bunch of people with this podcast.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not a big believer in the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself like stuff like aliens. I go, aliens haven't come here. The math to me doesn't make any sense. There's too many planets. It requires too much energy to span too much space. It's extremely, extremely, extremely unlikely, I guess is the best way I could put it. It's physically possible, but just crazy odds against aliens visiting us on a regular basis. And
more likely that we live in a simulation like the Matrix, right?
Yeah, that I would 100% agree with that. So that's something I do kind of I see as I'd have no way of knowing provably that I could show that that's not true. Just like I think you can't show that the existence of God isn't true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same concept. It's like self-fulfilling or self-defeating. I don't know, one of the two. But what's the other fringe stuff? I'm trying to think what else I might believe in that's like ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts. I can't get behind it. You're freezing on these looks. You look like you're frozen and stunned by my statements right now. Anyway, well, I don't know if you're coming back, but the other thing we were going to do, and I'm good kind of leaving it here. I'll retool. We're going to reset up MWeb on BTC Pay server. We'll do that next week. And actually next week we've got in Jung. Let me get this name right. Hang on a minute. You're really frozen, animal. If you're hearing me, I'm not hearing you. Jung Won Kim. Oh, he left. From Lantern Fi, which lets you will let you borrow against your crypto. And it's a very strange area, and I've talked to him already. Like, meaning what I mean by strange is like I'm iffy about promoting something yet that hasn't had some time under its belt.
Are you talking about
I'll probably say it a lot of times when he comes in. I really kind of question and try to understand how, like, what are the checks and balances in his business. And we'll also go through that when he comes in. But any sort of program where you're lending out your crypto, just be very be very aware of the risks and the history behind that, because we have a long list of people getting scammed out of their coins or getting a little overexcited and losing because the market doesn't do what they think it's going to do. The long game kind of thing. You're back. Do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, no, just I'm excited to talk to them and see what makes them different from the BlockFis and the Celsiuses that failed in the past. Because I do think that they do have some things that are quite different. I believe the yields are lower. They're taking less risks with people's collateral, or taking any risks. I mean, a lot of people got burned not too long ago.
Well, the thing about it is it's not an inexpensive borrowing rate, which is probably a good indicator, because it means you have a real interest rate. If you have people hey, we'll give you a loan at 0% or 1%, you should start wondering, like, well, what then? Why wouldn't you just go put your money in the U.S. treasuries and make 5%? Why are you giving me, why do you want my money for 1%? That make much
Because
sense.
at some point,
You know what I mean?
BlockFi is giving you 10% if you deposit your USDT into their service, right? Their staking service.
The BlockFi did that at one point.
Yeah, it was like over 10%.
Yeah, or Luna
Yield.
with percent, and now MicroStrategy. I hear people, or whatever the MSTY, their yield instrument. Where does the yield come from? I was like that meme where it's the goose.
The goose.
Where does the yield come from?
Yeah.
So always be questioning when things, well, it seems too good to be true, right? It should always like, wait a second, I don't know you. We're not friends here. Why would you give me this money for so cheap?
For sure.
We got him, and then like I said, the Stack Mobile guys, I think we're gonna have in up. And if anybody out there, I know not a lot of you listening right now, but has somebody who knows a lot about autism on either side of this, like I find this to be a really interesting topic and an important one for us as a people, because man, if these numbers are true, it's just really it's scary.
Yeah. No, and it's hard to know what to believe out there these days, right? So you don't
want to pass any judgment on the information, on the first things you get on the internet.
Right.
My bigger concern with the autism thing is that, does it create a disabled class, like a class of people that will be able to claim a disability, or that we have this infinite medical cost for across 70, 80 years? It would be crippling, because we don't want to abandon these people.
Profits off of it and they have an incentive to keep it going.
Of course they do. Yeah, I mean, if I own a hospital, it's a way to access money, and and then we all feel sympathy. So how, at some point, don't we feel an obligation to take care of these people, particularly if they were hurt by something we forced them to do? I don't know how we get past it. I mean, it becomes, talk about a workforce, a career of helping nonverbal autistic people. And it's just wild. It's such a, let's just hope for the best. I mean, maybe there are things they can find to fix being autistic, but like really treatments that allow them to be far more functional, and maybe even some of these people that are nonverbal are able to recover. I don't know enough about it.
Certainly we have the technology now, right? Like, especially with AI, to get closer to an answer and a solution.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. I mean, hope for the best and encourage.
Prepare for the worst.
No, not prepare. Well, I guess, when you say that, you have to prepare for the worst. Right?
Yeah.
But certainly to keep, the discourse open and honest.
Right.
And not just brandish someone as a harlequin because, you don't like them, right? It's like, you can't just
well, and what
ignore
also
what he
about
says because you don't like him.
What also about this is interesting that I want to say to some people that, okay, I'm now beginning to divide people into people who consume mainstream media and people who don't. And you can tell people who consume mainstream media right there. Their opinions seem to be easily swayed. I'm not saying that they're bad people, but they're locked into what I would say is like, they adhere to authority, or they respond to authority, I guess would be the best way to put it. And what people should ask is, why this speech? Why did this clip get so much attention? Why is it on every single newspaper, every single major news? I mean, if you go and search autism RFK, it's New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, CBC, Australian News. Every major publication dials into this one speech and this one clip and tries to paint it as he's, I don't know, diminishing autistic people. And the way I said to my friend is, genuinely, these people are being stupid on purpose. They know he knows what he's talking about. They know there's a 25%. They know this is a very real thing. So why did they go out to intentionally try to misinterpret this message? You know, of all the speeches, of all the things happening, you're all going to coalesce around this one clip. That's the thing that you should start making you go, well, why is that? Because like I had a friend say to me, he goes, well, it's just insulting to all the people who have done all this research on autism and all the billions spent already to think that he's going to come in and figure it out in X amount of time. And I was like, did it make you mad when Joe Biden claimed he was going to cure cancer during his 2019 campaign? Like, why does that not bother you? Is he insulting the cancer researchers? Like, understand, somebody's putting this in your head, and you're being directed to have an opinion when you weren't directed that way with Joe Biden.
Good luck with that.
I know, but like getting them to see, like, why does this one bother you and this one doesn't? Think about how things are being framed and how the information is gathered and filtered and presented to you, rather than pausing and saying, all right, these people probably don't have my best interests at heart, right? They're probably trying to manipulate me. That's why they brought up this specific topic. They have an agenda that they're trying to put forward to me. And now I can still accept it, but take it in, understanding that that's what is going on. This isn't being presented to you as a neutral topic with no opinion on it. It's being presented to you in a way to play on your emotions or to play on, whatever, your political leanings.
And their goals aren't to come to a conclusion or to come to a solution of the issue at hand, but rather to criticize the person bringing it up. It comes down to people and their innate desire to be part of a team and identify as Team A or Team B, and supporting whatever Team A's captain tells them to.
Right. Yeah, because then once you realize you're being manipulated, you got to go, okay, what's the motivation of the manipulation? Why is this person doing this? What's their agenda? Because if the agenda, like you said, is to denigrate RFK, which has happened like literally on a dime, the second he associates himself with Trump, he goes from, hey, environmental fighter to guy with a brain worm, who's probably a white supremacist or something, right? Like, same thing happened to Elon. As soon as he aligned himself with Trump, he went from a great guy who shoots rockets into space and builds electric cars to a demon overnight. It's so crazy. But you have to ask yourself the same thing. Do I do the same thing? Are there things I consume that I take at face value? And that's why, like I said, I have opinions about the autism thing, but I want to wait to reserve judgment, because I know it's a more complex topic than just me sitting here consuming something on Twitter. I don't know yet.
It probably takes years and years. And yeah, for sure, people who are affected by it directly are greater sources of information than I could ever be, right?
Yep.
So yeah, if we can get someone who's an expert.
Like having Brian in today was so cool, because it definitely gave a lot more texture to that conversation to me, rather than just having the knee jerk, they're wrong. Now I can kind of empathize. I understand what they're saying, and it's got me thinking more about the topic. So,
yeah. All
right, man. Tomorrow's Easter. Have a good holiday. I guess if you celebrate, I don't know. Now I gotta fucking layer things. Yesterday was Good Friday.
Celebrated, yeah.
A little bit of Jesus Christ Superstar, because
you guys don't have off on Monday, do you?
No, not I think some people do. I think I've seen maybe occasionally, but most people don't even take Good Friday off.
Yeah. In Canada, we have both days off.
Of course you do.
What can I say?
There was something in I watched something, never mind. It was a Canadian. You ever find stuff on YouTube, you're like, I don't know how I ended up here. I don't want to go off on the sidebar, but it's something in Canadian Parliament. Now, you guys have got a different set of problems up there, but
yeah, we got an election coming up, but unlike you guys, you know what? On our ballots, it says specifically to bring ID and proof of residence, and I think that's a good thing.
Really? It's not considered anti-democratic?
I don't see how it would be. I don't see how it would be. I don't get the
The
argument.
Real ID thing came up this week, which another one I'm not. Again, these things come and go so quickly. Sometimes you're like, I don't even know. You don't have time to even really form an opinion. So I try to stick to what we're interested in. All right. Well, hey, have a good one. Enjoy, and we'll be back Wednesday night. We're doing unrecorded spaces from now on. So everybody, thanks for watching. Have a good one, man.
Take it easy.